Well, hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started now. It's a little past 2 past the hour and a sunny day here in southern Michigan, which is rare and unusual. So I appreciate everyone for coming out. On behalf of the Michigan Association of CPAs, thanks for joining us today. We have an illustrious panel of a whole variety of folks. I'd like to introduce each of them in order, and then we're going to have Gary Rose, who's really a champion at Blue Sea Advisors, take us through some of the things in terms of pinch points. What we're trying to look at is what happens next. I mean, all of us have been concerned with how we got through this COVID crisis. Bob helped us last week talking about the PPP and ways to get through the PPP. I scared the heck out of everybody last week with what the economy looks like and the disaster caused by this whole mess. Gary's going to take us through today what COVID might look like to our bottom line and how we can get through that and how things will change. And then Mike's going to take us through tomorrow the things that happen in the changes within taxes, some of those things. So I'm going to have Bob give a quick introduction. Bob Wines, good friend of mine from the Plant Moran days, JD, CPA, all around bon vivant, and actually a guy who's been a lot. So Bob, tell us about what you've done at Insight 3, please, and tell us what's going on with you.
Insight 3, we're a consulting firm. We specialize in trying to help companies create strategies which are both profitable and have a strong community environmental impact. So it's a triple bottom line strategy. Background is like Leanne and I, we were Plant Moran together, both attorneys. Then on top of that, I did startups for about 30 some years, and I was in private equity. And when I got into private equity, I sat there and thought, well, what could I do? And Leanne said, well, Bob, you know, you're really good at telling people what to do, but you can't do it yourself. So we decided I should go into consulting. So that's
and it's worked great since.
It has. It's been wonderful. So.
Thanks, Bob. Mike Lorenz is a CPA JD. You notice there's a difference between the JD CPA and the CPA JD. Mike is with Cohen and Company, the tax partner in the local office, wizard at tax. Mike, you want to give a quick intro, bio?
Thank you, Leon. Yes. I'm with Cohen and Company. We're a regional CPA firm. We have about 6,500 team members across the Midwest. We have offices from Milwaukee to Baltimore, and we focus largely in tax, where we have our biggest practice area. We do a lot of test work as well, and a very strong consulting practice that helps our clients with transactional work and business transformation and automation processes. So we've been very involved with trying to figure out how to help our clients navigate this trying time.
Yeah, and we'll be hearing a lot about that tomorrow. I can't wait. I'm gonna hit you with all the hard questions. So tonight, our guest and our specific presenter is Gary Rose. Gary is a JD also, so we're swarming with lawyers up here. We're gonna have to spray, I think. And I've met Gary before. Gary has got some unique ideas on how things work. He's the CEO of Blue Sea Advisors. Great thinker outside the box. So Gary, I'm going to have you do an intro, and then why don't you get started, because I want to hear what you have to say.
Thanks a lot, Leon. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to get started on the presentation. Can everyone see the screen now? Okay. So Leon tossed me the topic, finding new weak links in your business, and it was a great research effort to kind of compile everything that was happening as I was putting this together. So we're going to talk today about, in the wake of COVID-19, constraint management could actually become a decisive competitive advantage. And what we'll cover today is, what is longevity planning? Who is the Blue Sea Advisors Network? What are the key theory constraints principles? How do we figure out what to change in the middle of a crisis? How should we manage our priorities and our teams? What are the critical performance metrics that we ought to be focusing on? And now seeing some canaries in the coal mine, like supply chain disruptions in the food supply, losses in the automotive and energy sector, unemployment rates, and a safety first mentality in government, that's telling us some things that maybe we can learn from. And finally, we'll look at some case studies of improvement projects that really move the needle from people within our network. A little bit about me. I practiced law for about 8.5 years in a business and estate planning practice, and inside a middle market oriented law firm with a concentration of clients in the transportation industry. And then at 34, I became general counsel and vice president of finance of my dad's window company for 4 years. He was needing a lot of help at the time and needed someone full time. So when I went in there, I went from the frying pan into the fire And it was a very tense time in terms of managing cash flow. We had hit our lines of credit with the bank, and everything in the office and in operations was in a complete disarray. So I secured expanded lines of credit by securing our accounts receivable under the Construction Lien Act, improved the order entry process, improved our contracts, our add orders, our change order system, our field service to do 1 trip rather than 3 trips, inventory control. For that, I needed to bring in my outside CPA firm to help. Later, I became CEO of the company at age 38. I grew it into with my team, grew it into a $26 million vertically integrated insulated glass manufacturing, millwork, and manufacturing window and door manufacturing company using a combination of lean, TOC, value stream mapping, and fast track project management tools. I'm currently licensed as a real estate and business broker, a life and health insurance broker, a property and casualty counselor, and I've had a lot of experience in the angel investing world, business development, technical trading, portfolio construction, and a family office. I've been a member of YPO and WPO for 22 years. I'm a current participant in the Exit Planning Exchange, the Business Enterprise Institute, Small Business Association of Michigan, and the Theory of Constraints International Certification Organization. I became a Jonah in the early 90s, which is basically a disciple or, of Dr. Ellie Goldratt, who really expanded my mind to look at things completely differently. So the Blue Sea Advisors Network specializes in longevity planning for middle market businesses and their owners. So what is longevity planning? It's a structured process for maximizing the value of your business, mitigating unnecessary risks, and preparing your team and your family for the natural life cycle transition. The network is a collaborative consortium of professional advisors and fractional share C-suite executives that are focused on improving the strength and longevity of middle market businesses. It's currently comprised of over 65 members and affiliate networks and advisory firms with niche expertise. They are also people I've gotten to know personally. They've met criteria for accomplishing something great and notable, have agreed to put the clients first in all of their decision making, essentially making us the same standard as fiduciaries. That's the way I was brought up in law, and that's the way I think is the best way to approach this market. And we bring Fortune 500 level professional and business advisory experience to the lower middle market at affordable prices with pre-quoted project fees and high returns on investment. So you can learn more about what we do at the website that you see on the screen, www.bluesea.llc. So today I'd like to give you a brief overview of the theory of constraint principles that which I learned and at least partially applied in my former lower middle market manufacturing company. I think these principles are particularly powerful today after 35 years of distillation, application, and continuous improvement in a huge variety of industries around the world. It was started by Ellie Goldratt. He was an Israeli physicist, and he wrote a unique business novel in the mid-1980s describing a new approach to managing system constraints. Since then, over 7 million copies have been sold in the world in 30 different languages, and it was used by Jeff Bezos of Amazon to build their supply chain and redefine the company's goal. It's been used since late 2015 by Microsoft in their supply chain IT business unit. And Theory of Constraints, or TOC, has developed over the last 35 years to include managerial performance metrics, formerly called throughput accounting, the logic tree thinking process, critical chain project management, strategy and tactics, and supply chain management. Now, both TOC and Lean, which was invented basically by Taiichi Ono of Toyota, both these methodologies are focused on doing the same thing, but with a little bit different emphasis, and that is increasing the flow through an organization. Both founders of these methodologies challenged the distortions and the invalid assumptions behind traditional product cost accounting. I can say that not being a CPA here, so I wouldn't offend anyone, but they made some great points on some of the underlying assumptions that may have misdirected some people's decision making. Now, TOC and Lean methods are responsible for major improvements in productivity, quality, cost reduction, and speed to market in companies around the world. So let's go over this at its core, the theory of constraints. I mean, there's hundreds of books written on it, so I'll just try to describe the main principles. Basically, an organization is like a chain of variable dependencies with one weakest link. It's not possible to distribute work evenly throughout a system. Now, why is that? Well, whenever an organization sets out to produce something, management tries to distribute the workload equitably across the organization. It tries to match anticipated demand with just the required amount of capacity. And once you've done that, it should make management easier, right? Since everybody has their work to do, so everybody should work all the time, right? Well, Ellie Goldratt strongly disagreed and concluded that in today's world of accelerating change and multiple product options, it's not possible to distribute work evenly throughout a system. And it's not even prudent to try and do so. Instead, manage your bottlenecks. An organization can be thought of as this chain of variable dependencies with one weakest link. And that weakest link is what governs the strength of your entire organization. Product-based organizations have functions like engineering, quality control, order entry, production, service that are necessarily unbalanced, but linked together to provide the ultimate offering to the market, your product or service. We have fluctuating overall demand, product mix fluctuations, seasonal changes in demand, customer demand and preferences fluctuate. Plus, additional capacity, whether it's additional people or additional machinery and equipment, have to be purchased in step increments, making the balance of workload unachievable. Hence, at any point in time, you will have excess capacity almost everywhere in your organization, except at the slowest bottleneck. Like a sand dial, the constraint is what limits the flow of value creation to the client. It limits the ability of the organization to generate new capital. A supply chain, in turn, represents the upstream and the downstream companies who assist in the creation of the ultimate product to the end user. Goldratt taught that it was critical to analyze your company in the context of your supply chain, both from a supply and a demand standpoint. So the traditional 5 steps are simply this. First, identify the system's constraint. Second, decide how to exploit the system's constraint, meaning how to maximize its use all the time. Don't let it starve. 3, subordinate everything else to the above decision, which was a way of saying you should synchronize your operations at the same flow rate as your constraint. Doing something faster than your constraint will just build up work in process inventory. Then elevate the system's constraint, which means if you want to have more growth, you're going to have to open up the size of that bottleneck. And then once you have moved that constraint elsewhere, go back to step 1 and identify the new system constraint. So the fastest way to find your current constraint is really just for the ownership of the company to answer a set of simple questions, but very fundamental questions about the current state of performance of their organization as a whole in relation to their goals and objectives and timeline for achievement and best practices. And we have such a diagnostic tool on our website. And the first section, which is called the Longevity Strength Assessment, is the place to start, whether your organization pre-COVID was firing on all cylinders or not. If it wasn't, then it's time to become more specific and take a few more checkup sections to see where the weakest and the strongest areas of your company were. We summarize those results in graph form, but then can drill down into all the areas of weakness that could point to either a physical internal constraint that are causing these multiple problems throughout your organization, maybe a functional constraint between departments, or a policy constraint. Of course, the world has dramatically changed suddenly from this pandemic, but the longevity process didn't change. Only the number of bottlenecks probably increased, and your ultimate constraint probably moved, maybe into finance for lack of cash flow, or sales, or your supply chain. It's more important now than ever to include risk management and cash flow improvement options as you resume operations.
Hey, Gary,
Yes.
as I look at this chart and you're looking at longevity strength, can you just run me through what those mean? What does longevity strength mean? And like, I'm concerned about our business. I'm concerned where we are right now. We've got 90 people still firing on all cylinders. We're working hard. We're getting everything done. Our leadership is strong. I think we've actually gone up in leadership. But give me a run through. What do you mean by longevity strength, and what do you mean by constraint management and specifically attractiveness? I think I understand some of the others.
Very good. Longevity, see, there's 2 different things. One is the ownership, and the ownership is going to be equivalent to the lifeline of the particular owner. But the business, hopefully, will be built on a goal that goes past the owner's lifetime. It's something that is focused outside of the organization. And it is focused on what will have continuing value in the marketplace. It should be looked at from the standpoint of an outside investor looking to buy that company. It should be looked at customers for whether, through the eyes of customers, do they want to keep buying either products or service from that particular firm.
So isn't that huge right now? I mean,
Well, it's everything.
I'm seeing deals, that were on the table, 8 weeks ago, falling off the table all over the place. So
Absolutely.
don't you
Absolutely
think that's going to be the biggest? I think the longevity strength is probably going to be the biggest concern of everybody. I mean, a lot of us are going, yeah, innovation would be nice. Teamwork's probably in some places working okay. Network is probably okay. Leadership is probably even better. Maybe if we're solidly working through this, but man, I would feel like the torpedo's hitting the longevity strength in most companies right now.
It is. And the thing is, it's almost, and we'll cover this a little bit later, it's almost caused a beeline down to the innovation space. Because to me, it's about how can we follow end customer demand? End customer demand is really what's going to be driving the future strength of the company. Your ability to follow that end demand and look at what people need, what they want, and how you can either get through the constraint, around the constraint, but continue that flow of value to the customer as the needs change and the preferences change. Now, innovation is a big part of that, and I'm very happy to have on our team the head of an alliance that has over 21 structured innovation specialists who's on the call tonight with us, Dana, and they have solved some unsolvable problems in the past. This is a great time to work innovation into your strategy.
So I can't help but think about like a restaurant. I just can't help but think about it, a restaurant owner. And they've, their life was going on nicely on February 19th, and now they've been closed for 8 weeks and maybe longer, trying to figure out how to go through that. Could you give me an example of innovation on that? I think that would be, I can see some of it, but how do you feel about that? Where is that going to be?
Well, it's one of the toughest ones because
I'm going to give you the easy one. I'm not going to give you the CPA for
well,
that.
it was, people went out for a reason. They wanted the ambiance. They wanted to not cook at home. They wanted to be with other people and just the fun of being in a crowd. Until the fear dissipates, until a vaccine makes us feel comfortable of getting close again, restaurants are going to have to really innovate the way that they can satisfy the need to eat and to need to not cook every night, eating the same stuff. So maybe looking at how they can have home delivery services, maybe bring the dining experience into your own home and do it safely, and maybe do it with some robotics even. There's been some tremendous improvements. So basically to help people feel that what they're eating is safe, how it's being delivered is safe, but still giving them a great experience.
I did have a weird one happen. I had a person take me to dinner at Capitol Grill. They called Capitol Grill up, ordered dinner for me, for my wife and I, and then had it delivered to us, which I thought was pretty interesting. In exchange, I had to get on a Zoom call with them, but it was worth it. It was
Sure.
good. And the wine was good too. I didn't mean to disrupt your thought, but as soon as I saw that longevity strength thing, I've seen this before. I've seen your checkup before.
Yep.
And I was kind of playing with it in our own firm, and I'm going, wow, our leadership is really strong, and our network did really well, and we're doing okay on teamwork. Man, this longevity strength, that's kind of painful right now. It's a pain point. So.
Right.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. So basically, over the years, TOC has expanded a number of its tool sets, but there's still some room for improvement, in my opinion. And that was based on my experience in the risk management space. There wasn't enough attention within those 5 initial rules to pay attention to the protection and the risk management side. So after basically a trial and error process and reading everything I could on it, I added some additional steps to the original 5 steps. And if I could sum it up in one phrase, it's focus on business longevity. And so why do that? Basically because every business owner is going to want or need to retire at some point, and 100% of the owners will exit their business at some point, either planned or an unplanned way. And longevity planning is really the only way to maximize the transferable value of the business and reward you and your loved ones for your life's work, the risks you've taken on, the personal goals you've worked so hard to achieve. When you can no longer work, your liquid capital investments will have to support you. And that's getting harder and harder, as Leon can tell you. And it's going to have to support you and your spouse and your desired standard of living for an unknowable duration of your retirement. So what does this process entail? Essentially the first one is aligning, crystallizing a clear vision, mission, and set of guiding principles for the organization based on the ultimate goals and objectives of the company's ownership. Now, here's where I depart slightly from, actually dramatically, from Dr. Goldrat's novel, The Goal. So he suggested that the goal of every for-profit company should be that the company make more money now and in the future. However, that goal may inspire the owner, but it doesn't do much for his team. And I believe the business needs to state an inspiring goal, one that is focused outside the organization's own metrics, one that would inspire others to want to do business with the company, inspire your team to work on something with greater longevity and impact than the owner's desire to retire in style. The goal to make more money now and in the future may be a necessary condition, but it's insufficient, in my view, to create longevity for the business itself. And I've never met a business owner all my life that as soon as they left the business, wanted to see their business go down in flames. So let's make sure up front that there's clarity, alignment, buy-in to these objectives, or else don't even try to start on a continuous improvement process. And I think it's really important to make sure everyone on your team, and I was a big violator of this, everyone on your team, and I mean everyone, gets it, wants it, and can do it. The company owners are the ones who have the legal, moral, and ethical right to define the vision for the company. They're the ones responsible for building its enduring foundations. They're the ones with their names on the bank loans. So an outside EOS implementer, EOS is Entrepreneurial Operating System, they can be of immense help in this regard because it starts with vision. And especially when you combine EOS with a longevity planning mentor, you got to get step one right because everything flows from it. The second thing is, yes, identify your current constraint that blocks achievement of the company's ultimate goals. And, you have to determine whether the current constraint is within your operations or if there's plenty of internal capacity and maybe not enough sales. Where did that constraint move? Did it move into the marketing link? Is there not enough qualified leads for your sales force? Or maybe it's the sales force performance and they're not following up very well or not generating new prospects. So what you don't want to do is to starve your internal constraint by letting it go outside of your organization. So that is starving your constraint. So you want to bring that constraint back in your organization so you can monitor and manage your constraint and maximize the flow of value that you are creating. The third step is select your constraint management team.
Gary, can you give me an example of outsourcing your strength and trying to bring it back in?
Yes, for example, let's say it's in marketing and you have a sales force that has to generate and cold call a lot, but you're not getting anybody calling about information about your company or its products or services. And B2B companies are known for that. They don't even know really what marketing entails. So, and a lot of these companies, they can't afford to have a full-time chief marketing officer. So what they can instead do is hire the services of a fractional CMO, someone who's been a marketing officer at some point in a company, who's had to bring in the type of prospects that the company wants to attract. No need to rediscover the wheel here. There's people who know how to do that and are expert at it. So that's a very affordable way to increase that pipeline. Or you might have a problem with sales management. If your salesmen aren't delivering and they're not giving the right consistent message, or they're not really focusing on what the customer's needs are and aren't communicating that message very well, then you might need some help in the sales management, putting in processes and structure. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have a fractional share, VP of sales service, Teresa Renault, who might even be on the line with us right now, who does that for companies with, let's say, less than 10 people. And the owner doesn't want to manage the sales force and keep everything going inside of his plant. So this is a great affordable option for that. So the idea is to try to keep your constraint internal, because once it goes external, everyone's looking around for orders. Everybody's really nervous. That's not the kind of environment you want. You want people who want to do business with your company, and everybody starts rowing in the right direction to deliver that value to the customer. The fourth step is exploiting the current internal capacity constraint. by using your existing internal resources or external fractional expert resources to get the most value out of your constraint. If you're letting that constraint, let's say it's a machine or process somewhere in a department, if you're letting that sit idle, every minute lost at that machine is a minute lost for the entire system. So maybe there's things that the operator's doing that he doesn't need to be doing, and you can offload that to other folks that can assist and increase it. There was one application where our European TOC consultant, Phil Maris, went into a company. It was one of the most lean companies in the world. And in 5 minutes, he increased throughput by 15%. How did he do that? By going on the line and seeing where there was micro stoppages. There were little starvation of the constraint in the process. So by having a little buffer of 7 to 12 assemblies ready to go into the constraint, it was done. It's just, and it had a huge impact on the bottom line. So once you really know how to focus in on your constraint, you can make rapid improvement and without spending any extra money.
Gary, I have a question for you on that. If it's not an internal constraint, and some of our clients and are experience external constraint, which I would say is demand, which could be zero now, almost like the buggy whip, only overnight. So does this process, can you use this process not just to improve, but to literally reinvent the tools and resources that you have to deliver that talent to a completely different solution? Because I think some of our clients may never open again, but they have great teams. How do they use this technique to—
Let's go to the next slide to address that. If you do have the demand, because some companies are doing fine, like people in the robotic space, there's still a lot of demand for social distancing rules. How are you going to do this? Well, maybe a collaborative robot would help. There's a lot of ways to maybe skin the cat here. But let's say fundamentally, you have a good team, but maybe the end product is there's
social distancing just makes it impossible to deliver. It's just can't do it.
Right. So you have to jump right down to the discover, step 9. And that really wasn't in the original 5 steps. And that discover is to keep abreast of new technologies in the Industry 4.0 space that could address common constraints within your industry. That maybe is another way to accomplish the same thing without having people shoulder to shoulder with each other. And then the next step is innovate, installing a structured innovation process. I mean, innovation is coming up with a totally new idea. If you don't know how to do that, you're not going to get anywhere. But to get a structured innovation specialist in there, looking at what your core capabilities are and maybe challenging some fundamental conflicts, some fundamental core assumptions that are invalid, people will automatically start opening up with new ways to do things. It's amazing. And we're going to see an example of that later on in the slides. So traditionally, a company is basically made up of a lot of different functions. And these are the primary functions in like a manufacturing organization. And everything kind of flows up to the top, to the CEO, or flows down from the CEO. And oftentimes the problem is coordinating all the different departments. And sometimes even you have if you ask somebody what's wrong with the company in this type of an organization, any person is going to speak from the viewpoint of his own area of responsibility and the impact on his own area. But oftentimes the problems really stem from the gaps, and that can cause competition and finger pointing between the various departments and functions. All of a sudden you don't have a team rowing in the same direction. So sometimes that says, well, maybe we have the wrong metrics and the wrong reward system in place. Let's instead look at the global view. What's the company trying to do as a whole? And let's make sure our metrics are rewarding that kind of behavior. Remember, it's easy to stop one guy with a vision, but it's a lot harder to stop a team that's rowing in the same direction. This is a better overall model. You'll see that the horizontal links are all in gold, and I did that for a reason, because it brings me to this EOS process. I'm a real fan of Gino Wickman's traction book. because it's just fundamental things that should be in place, and yet sometimes aren't inside organizations. And this is what really links every function together. I don't know of any better methodology than that in accomplishing this. And what it essentially consists of is a unified long-term vision for the company, having the right people in the right seats, having the right metrics in place to drive the right behaviors, having short-term weekly scorecards to track progress or bottlenecks, documented processes, open communication, and a culture of focus, accountability, and discipline. In other words, what binds the organization together is the alignment and the teamwork of the people all working toward the larger, extended vision, the longevity of the company, and not on local performance measures of an individual department. So if you want to take a look at this slide, there's some great ideas. I mean, maybe a lot of you guys you already know, Todd Saxey, who's a member of my YPO group from Saxey Construction. He's a real fan of the EOS process. Zoop, which you'll all recognize, Detroit Radiator, ASI Asphalt, they've had some great success by employing traction inside their organization. Now, in reality, even though there is only one weakest link at any one time, that weak link might only be a temporary bottleneck, easily solved and exploited. So the key is to observe it over several days to see if it's a persistent bottleneck, which might be your constraint, or just a temporary one that popped up due to product mix variation or some other reason. After the first bottleneck, there's usually just a handful of other weaker links, or I call near constraints, that could be identified as being next in line, as shown in this chain above, right here. And if you can visually communicate that to everyone so they know, okay, we're going to have focus in these areas. These areas might be critical resources, which if you lost them, it could be very difficult, expensive, and time-consuming to replace. But rather than having numerous projects going on everywhere, trying to fix the problems everywhere in the system, it's really best to focus just on those very few bottlenecks that govern the throughput of the entire enterprise and focus relentlessly on improving flow through those areas using resourcefulness, lean manufacturing tools, or quality tools like Six Sigma to reduce variation. I like to mention a couple of things here. Let's say your constraint has moved now into marketing, and social media is now the big thing. LinkedIn, for example. A lot of people are connecting on LinkedIn, but they don't know how to build a relationship on LinkedIn and to turn that into qualified leads. Well, we have a resource inside Lucy Advisors, Heather, who is a psychologist, background in psychology, has an eagle eye for effective communications, and her skill set is one of those link strengtheners that your sales force needs in this environment. This case study shows one salesperson who wasn't doing any prospecting. So he goes to her, does some LinkedIn automation, brings leads in, and closes a deal for $127,000. That's pretty good. Thank you, Heather, for being a great addition to our team. You're there. Teresa Renault from Sales QB. She's the one I was mentioning that typically goes into companies with 10 or fewer salespeople. Here's a couple examples of a GIS software developer where, as a result of their intervention, the cost of sales went down 31% and revenue increased 24%. Pretty good outcome. I think everybody would take a 24% increase in sales these days. And for an ad specialty distributor, the outcome was increasing sales by 17% while sales commissions remained level. And so the business model shifted from low margin items to higher margin business, increasing the profitability of the firm. We have another a firm inside that also specializes in marketing. It's a fractional CMO alliance, some 65 members. And they helped a 45-year-old manufacturer achieve 100% year-over-year growth. I mean, that's enough to save a company. And they're pros at it. They just know what they're doing. And what about cash constraints? If things were going real well before this sudden pandemic hit, maybe you made some improvements to your building over the last few years. Well, on average, our cost segregation expert offers approximately $150,000 in additional depreciation per $1 million of purchase or construction cost of a building versus the normal 39-year straight line method. I mean, those are great savings, and you need the cash now, not later. And so they're experts on knowing how to do those engineered cost segregation studies and withstand any kind of IRS attack on that. And here's an example of a couple of big properties that might have to undergo rethinking how to use these spaces. And look at the tax savings that were achieved by doing that. Here's an example of our R&D tax credit firm that one of the largest in the nation, and made up of some former IRS commissioners, as a matter of fact. And Tom Ridge from Homeland Security is on there. Just take a look at some of the R&D tax credits that they were able to get for their companies. You know, on a $7.2 million company getting $441,000 as an R&D tax credit, that's pretty good. How about an automotive safety manufacturer with $1.2 million in federal state R&D tax credits?
Hey, Gary and Mike, I got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
How does it work out when you have a service company? Can you get an R&D tax credit on intellectual property? If somebody writes a book, writes a program, creates a trademark, are those eligible for R&D?
Well, marketing things or ways to bring products to market, it does not qualify. It has to use a hard science, one of the hard physical sciences, and it has to resolve a technical uncertainty.
But I've seen that in engineering companies, Leon.
Oh, absolutely.
Where people and architects, engineers who are trying to create new solutions for roads or bridges or buildings, and portions of their work definitely can qualify for this.
So give me an example, Mike, because I have service companies that I work with that they are creating certain kinds of intellectual property. Would it be a patent? Would it be?
No, not necessarily a patent. I think all it is a new and unproven technique to solve a problem. So if it's, and R&D isn't my space, but I know that that service companies, it doesn't require that you manufacture something to be eligible to get the credit.
Do the two of you think that there's a lot of unused R&D credits?
Yeah,
I think people were very reluctant to claim it. The government for a long time made R&D credit an audit area, so I think people shied away from it. So I would use the word unclaimed, not unused. If you go through the trouble of creating one of these studies and getting the credit, I assume you did that because you had the tax ability to use it.
Right.
But I do think that it is a underutilized strategy because of the history of the government's perspective on auditing in this area.
That's correct. And that's why you need to really choose an experienced R&D tax credit firm who will document things properly, who will give you a guarantee that you will have no costs to fight an IRS claim in front of the courts. They paper their files well. And you know, a good example of that is this next study. Innovation by one of our members that changed an entire industry. So here's the scenario. It was a 50-year unsolvable problem. How do you get more thrust from a jet engine with less noise? All right. And if a resolution could be found, it could result in over $1 billion in new sales plus tens of billions of dollars in value to the entire industry. Our member's structured innovation facilitator was brought in to focus the two-person subject matter expert team. Took them 20 hours to find a solution. The solution was so good that the government actually made their invention a requirement and to be shared throughout the whole industry to solve the noise problem on jet engines. And so, you know, this is the type of talent that we have inside the organization. Innovation is very powerful, and it's never been more important than right now. Another gentleman that...
One other observation I'd like to make there, Gary, is several times in clients that I've worked with, there wasn't a department that said research and development. There wasn't a lab. They weren't trying to solve a specific 50-year unsolvable problem. So it took more effort to find that company was devoting time and resources to R&D.
This is why it's so important, Mike, to contact an R&D expert, tax credit expert now, so that as innovation is occurring and people are running into technical issues on how to do things, like use collaborative robots to do certain things, to do it safer, let's make sure the documentation is just being kept in place right now. a lot of that could be very valuable down the line. And I know, manufacturers, especially anybody who deals with people coming into a facility, are going to have to comply with safety first guidelines for the, for the foreseeable future now. Another great company, part of our network, is Light Guide Systems. They have an augmented reality workstation, and it's a real-time way to manage your internal constraint or bottleneck resources. What they've done is found a way how to give work instructions right on the surface of your work area, whether it's a table or whether it's a machine that you're taking apart. It lights up the system, tells you what to do step by step. It has, you can't proceed until you get the green arrow going forward. If you forgot a part or you didn't do something right, it's got a red X, so you can't go to the next workstation. So this is an absolutely brilliant technology. It's in 700 installations globally by some of the top manufacturers, which you'll see their logos listed on the bottom. And I invite you to go to their website and take a look at their many videos on how this is used in so many different applications. It's, once you've identified your constraint and your bottleneck, why would you ever want to run bad quality parts through it? It would cost you a fortune if that's governing the output of your entire organization. This is a way to screen applicants, to train applicants, and then put them right on the line on the exact same workstation when they're ready and up to flow, and then monitor it in real time, and then keep a record of it in case there is some claim down the line. Well, know that these things were followed. So it shields you also against potential discovery requests on what happened. They can get it down to the lot and the day and the size. The size of production that went through it. Really great, genius technology. What about expense management? Cash is king. The people in the procurement area really ought to be concentrating, as we'll see, on supply chain management, not going through and auditing a bunch of bills and they don't know what they can do about it. Why don't you bring in an expert who knows how to get money back from utilities? Maybe they're paying too much insurance premiums. Maybe their shipping rates are too high. Maybe their merchant services are charging too much. And these pros, they go in and don't charge you anything up front. They only share in the cost recovery that you've been stepping over, the diamonds on the plant floor you've been stepping over. And here's some examples. For a small manufacturer, 15 employees, got $3,800 with less than an hour of their time. Now, where else are you earning $3,800 an hour in your organization? How about a 225 person employee? It's approximately the size of my company. This is $29,000 savings for less than 2 hours of their time. 14,500 hours, I'll take that. And how about a 10,000 plus employee manufacturer? I think I know who he's talking about. Very large company manufacturing, tools, and they've saved 180,000, so $36,000 an hour. Pretty good deal.
So we got a great question that's been flowing through on our chat. I think we should talk about that.
Yeah.
So Linda was asking us, in a business environment where everything you thought you knew has no certainty about, is reducing risk the most important thing for the short run, or you take risk and hope for the best and go that way? So the real question that Linda's asking is, do you buy up a competitor and increase your footprint? Do you add a product to your product line? Do you preserve and conserve until we get to the other end of the crisis? We had a private context about somebody in the entertainment business that, their whole thing has changed. What if you had a sports team right now? Or what if you had a college right now? Those are all the kinds of questions. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about Linda's question. In these weird times, do you take the ball and run with it, or you hunker down? What's the strategy? What do? Do you buy a competitor? Do you take that risk? Do you add a product to the product line, or do you preserve and conserve?
I have my opinion, but go ahead, guys, if you want to jump in.
Bob, what would you do?
Well, first, I think I would have to look at the overall risk. I'd look at the market from a big picture, just sitting back and saying, how does that company fit into the whole ecosystem long term?
Right.
So if I look at it and say it's got key long-term relationships, they could be supply chain, they could be customer, they could be regulatory, whatever, and I don't see the change in the market negatively impacting those long-term, then it makes sense to me to consider making the investment in expansion. On the other hand, if I look at it and say, no, we've got fundamental changes in the market because, let's say, for example, COVID-19 is going to change the whole way that we deal with interpersonal and intercompany relationships, and that's going to damage my relationships with these organizations, then I'm at high risk and it may be time for me to bail.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that earlier slide where you have to evaluate what your strengths are and whether you believe your industry is coming back. I'll use breweries out there that are converting over to distilleries for sanitizers, which I'm seeing happen. If that's a short-term solution just to wait it out for COVID and then go back to their primary core business, which is what I suspect is happening, that makes a lot of sense to me, to use the resources that you have to survive, if you will, this period without taking a greater risk. On the other hand, if you see that you're a buggy whip and that industry or that demand for that market may not come back for 24 or 36 months, you might have to take the risk to look for a different market, because the practical reality is your current market is too far out from the enterprise won't survive that long.
Let's run with that, because I like breweries because they make something I like. So if the four of us were counseling somebody who had a brewery that had switched over to, disinfectants, let's suppose they have a decent team, they have everything else, would our strategy be hunker down? Or would we try to pick up the weak and pick off whoever's not making it? Would we go around the country finding other brewers? Would we double down on marketing? What would our advice be? I'm just curious.
Leon, the temptation was to jump in a month ago into making toilet paper. And the constraint wasn't in the manufacturing of toilet paper. It was in the distribution channels. I suspect that 6 months from now, the constraint is not going to be the availability, a constraint in the manufacturing of hand sanitizer. It might be in the supply chain, or it might be, might be something else. If you can pivot that quickly and get to market by having a demand-driven organization, all the power to you. But just recognize that there's costs involved in switching over and investing and so forth. I mean, I do think hand sanitizer is great. I would just kind of look at what the capacity is already in the industry, where the constraint really was in the supply chain before, I start making more of it.
Wouldn't it seem that there's going to be brewers going out of business, that there's going to be small craft brewers that are too levered and their PPP loan isn't going to get them through, or their distribution just broke down? I mean, doesn't it seem like is this going to be an opportunity for a strong brewery to pick up other ones? I don't know. Bob, you've done a lot of M&A. What do you think?
Well, the brewery industry, it's turning into noise. So if you look at it 8 years ago, 5 years ago, even the microbreweries, they were unique. Now there's so many in the stores that when you walk in there, it's another brand. And it's literally just turned into noise. So I would say if that were your market niche, the only reason you would probably want to acquire another entity is if you saw a unique brand that you thought you could leverage, or it had unique distribution relationships or capacity, which you knew you could take advantage of. But just to buy another brewery, you're probably at this point in time buying noise.
Geographic expansion. So if you're a Midwest brewery and you see somebody in the South and you want to expand, you can buy up a competitor in the South who's struggling for maybe pennies on the dollar. And then you've expanded geographically your operation and your distribution. There's a flip side to all of this too. You look at some manufacturers of products that were struggling competing with Amazon in the marketplace because of the products that were being shipped in from China that are now hard to get. I've seen some manufacturers of, say, earplugs, hearing protection, things like that are suddenly booming because they're supplying Amazon with product that they can't get from other, right? That's going to level out. There's an ebb and flow that's going to happen. And so they're taking advantage of it right now and working around the clock to fill that demand. But it's probably going to level back out when the cheaper product can come back into the market.
And the other problem I've seen, Leon, in looking at my client base and the activities they're involved in, there's really we're really in the front end of COVID. So I haven't seen myself, clients in real financial straits where they're willing to lower their price. It's still soon enough, and there's still enough government support with being able to lay your employees off and have the unemployment agency pay wages. and deferral of payments on loans. I haven't seen any sellers get willing to lower their price enough to drive that kind of consolidation.
Let me ask you a question, Mike. I think I was asked about the difference. I mean, I'm supposed to be the economist on this call. So I was asked about the difference between 2008 and 9 and now. And I think there's a clear-cut capital difference. We don't have capital destruction like we had in 08 and 09. We have a labor destruction.
Or income destruction.
Right.
Individuals are still getting paid.
Yeah. Everybody's still making money. They're just not at work, and our consumption habits
Correct.
have significantly changed. So it is going to be a different level. That goes back to Linda's one question, which I really like. And is that, do you preserve and conserve until we get to the other side of the crisis? And I think you're saying logically, we don't know when that is yet. And so the trick is going to be somewhere on the other side of the crisis as soon as you figured out where the other side is.
And deciding whether you think your niche comes back to something close to full capacity, at least in your market, in the next reasonable period of time, 6 to 12 months,
Right.
or you're in one of those more difficult areas where it could be 24 or 36 months. I mean, if I was a restaurant with the issue we were talking about earlier, maybe I'd be trying to figure out how to become Blue Apron and deliver just like you did the other night from Capitol Grill to your home. I might be trying to do that virtually all the time because I don't think that there will be a quick return to seating in those facilities.
That's correct.
Or cruise ships.
It's right back down to getting some innovation involved, keeping within your longevity plan and your vision and your goal, and also looking how long that the owner wants to stay involved in the business, because there is risk in innovation. There's risk in just continuing to doing what you're doing. So you have to make sure that whatever your decision is, it's made in the context of what the end consumer wants and needs. Probably
so
first
Gary,
and then goes wants. Yeah.
In 2008, we saw a lot of transition not happen. So in other words, succession and sale was delayed for 5 or 10 years, really, where business owners couldn't get what they perceived as fair value for their life's work. Correct. I suspect we will see something similar to that in this environment, where it will be difficult to have transition in the near term.
I agree with you.
What do you think, Bob?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. There's just too much risk in the market long term. We don't know what's going to go on with capital markets. As you know, Leanne, look at the debt structures. What's going to happen there? We're in a, if you look at the long-term debt cycles, we're late in that game, and we're throwing on top of a pandemic, which is going to create all sorts of just out and out market risk. Things are going to transition.
So do you guys think it's supply drying up, that no one's going to sell because they don't want to sell, they won't get their price? Or do you think it's going to be demand drying up of the buyers aren't going to be there? I think the buyers are going to be there.
I think it's supply.
There's a lot of dry there's a lot of dry powder. You know that better than I do. I just don't think the sellers are going to go like it's not worth it to me today.
I mean, I'm looking at the amount of cash sitting out on the side right now. It's the biggest amount we've ever seen. It's huge. There's dry powder everywhere. I just wonder, don't you think, I think, Gary, you said this, everybody eventually leaves their business. I mean, there are going to be situations where there's going to be some natural attrition too. There's not just going to be people selling out. I mean, maybe that's an interesting question that people ought to be asking themselves. If my exit is, I'm going to wait it out and I don't make it, then my family exits, whether they like it or not, at a bargain basement price.
Well, here's one of my favorite slides that Dr. Ellie Goldrat said. Think about this. Until the last company in the supply chain has sold something to a customer, nobody in the supply chain has really sold anything.
Yeah.
So you have to keep your eye on end consumer demand, rethink and orient your business to supply what the end consumers need and then what they want. Consider your entire supply chain in-house. That's what you must now have to manage. Focus on identifying the constraint within your entire supply chain and subordinate your activities to that rate of flow. Determine if your company can develop a solution to exploit the constraint, or better yet, elevate the flow through it or around it. That's where the innovation will come in.
I think you really got a good point on the supply chain in-house and just looking at all the different pieces of the supply chain. It is fragile, isn't it?
Yes, extremely fragile. And we'll jump over some of the metrics, but to address your question, we've seen already some canaries in the coal mine. So when the constraint moves outside your organization and into something like a supply chain, you experience loss of control, unpredictability, high chance of financial missteps. And your supply constraints will hurt your due date performance or even your ability to complete released orders. So what good will that do? You won't be able to invoice for them. So bottlenecks in the supply chain can lay waste to upstream suppliers and create shortages due to customer hoarding. And demand constraints could starve your operations from producing sufficient profits. So what we're having is constraints appearing now in areas that they weren't before, right? In your supply chain, there wasn't a problem of getting supply of anything. Everything was in oversupply around the world, globally. What was in short supply other than sales? Everything was stocked to the shelves everywhere in every corner.
Labor wasn't always easy to
Yeah, I was
come
going to
by.
say employees were in short
Ladies has
supply.
been tough to get. Good
Well,
people.
Yeah, but
been-
that wasn't a constraint because Industry 4.0 was there to bring in robots if you couldn't find it. So it was just a matter of maybe a policy constraint of not wanting to invest in the robotics, but that's not a real shortage. We had the capacity to fulfill demand. Supply was not the problem. Now it's a problem. All right, and the demand has shifted on us too because we don't know how soon. In fact, I just saw a slide today from Statista on the percentage of reluctance of people who will go to a restaurant or a theater or a sports club or anything, even after they say the coast is clear. 45%. Well, what if 45% of your market all of a sudden is hesitant to go and visit your facilities anymore? Can you survive profitably?
Yeah.
Yes,
Good question.
you have demand and supply constraints facing you now.
Well, this has been great, and it's been very interesting. We are now at the end of our hour. I could listen to you for another 2 hours. It's been a really good, interesting thing, and I'd love to have a more of a conversation with my co-panelists. Perhaps we could find a brewery to go to and socially distance that.
We'll share all their products,
Yeah,
disinfectants and beers.
We'll share. Yeah, we'll use both. It'll be great. I'd like to thank everybody for being on the call with us today. I'd like to thank Gary for his great presentation. Bob and Mike for being with us. On Thursday, not tomorrow, Thursday, we will be having our tax presentation. We'd encourage everybody to come back and to share the invitation. On behalf of the MICP, I'm going to flip it back to Jim. Jim, you want to just give a quick comment? And I'd like to thank everybody for being on the call with us.